A Russia Museum Website Guide. Chapter 1. Russia Museum websites at web.archive.org/web/20160401140945/https:/www.archives.icom.museum/vlmp/russia.html. RussianCulture.ru. RussianMuseums.info. Museum.ru. abcvolga.ru, the ABC of Volga, the official website of Volga Region Museum Workers Association. imak.ru, the IMAK Gallery. The IMAK Gallery was founded in Ufa, Bashkiria. aivazovsky.euro.ru, Ivazovsky Picture Gallery. akhmatova.spb.ru, Anna Akhmatova Museum in the Fontany Dom, Fountain House in St. Petersburg. Alabin.ru, Samarayan Regional Historical Museum by P. Alabin. alexanderpalace.org/palace/index.html, Alexander Palace. This site, entirely in English, has a time machine with which you can go on a tour of the Alexander Palace in St. Petersburg, home to the Romanov family. allmuseums.spb.ru, Museums of St. Petersburg. arc.novgorod.ru, Novgorod's Archaeology, website devoted to Veliki Novgorod's archaeology. arca.ru, Russian Architecture. This site deals with the history of Russian architecture, modern design and construction projects. Arkhangelskoye.ru, the State Museum Estate Arkhangelskoye. arms-museum.tula.ru, Tula State Arms Museum. Arseniev.org, Primorsky State Union Museum named after V.K. Arseniev. art-museum.khv.ru, Far Ost Art Museum. The Far Eastern Museum of Fine Arts is the biggest Russian state-owned collection of the works of fine art located in the western part of the Pacific region. art-museum.ural.ru, Ekaterinburg Museum of Fine Arts. Ekaterinburg Museum of Fine Arts is one of the biggest art museums in the Urals. art.chuvashia.com, Chuvash State Art Museum, official site of Chuvash State Art Museum. artdolls.ru, Wakhtanov Gallery. The Wakhtanov Gallery was founded in April 1997. artfund.ru, the International Arts Fund, the website of the creative voluntary organization combining specialists in the area of art, crafts and arts, design and architecture, fine art. artmuseum.yar.ru, Yaroslavl Art Museum. In one of the most picturesque places of the ancient town of Yaroslavl on the Volga embankment, there is a beautiful building which houses the Art Museum, the largest in Russia provincial art museum. artsave.ru, St. Petersburg International Center for Preservation. St. Petersburg International Center for Preservation is working to establish, through international collaboration, a stable infrastructure of conservation expertise to save St. Petersburg's historic art and architecture. artsmia.org, the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. The Minneapolis Institute of Arts houses more than 100,000 objects from diverse cultural traditions spanning 5,000 years of world history. artstudio.com/restoration/index1.htm, the Restoration Department by State Russian Museum. autograph-mus.narod.ru, the Emperor Nicholas II Autograph Museum, u.s.s.r/Russia, the Emperor Nicholas II Autograph Museum, being an exclusive museum of the kind in the world, was founded in USSR, Russia at the end of the 20th century. automuseum.ru, Museum of Ancient Automobiles and Engineering. avia.russian.ee/index2.html, the Virtual Aircraft Museum, brief information about planes of the different countries of the world, the USA, Russia, Japan, Germany, and others. avia.russian.ee/vertigo, fixed-wing aircraft museum. bogorodiytisk.amr-museum.ru, the Bogoroditsk Palace Museum and Park. boldino.nov.ru, Boldino. Borodino.ru, State Borodino War and History Museum and Reserve. Burganovi.ru, the Moscow State Museum Burganov's House. The Moscow State Museum Burganov's House was founded by full member of the Russian Academy of Fine Arts, State Prize winner, Professor Alexander Nikolaevich Burganov on the basis of author's works and personal collection of the artist. Cathedral.ru, the State Museum Monument Isakievsky Sobor. Isaac's Cathedral is a remarkable monument of Russian architecture of the first part of the 19th century. cbook.ru/Tchaikovsky, State House Museum of P. Center.rusmuseum.ru, Russian Center for Museum Teaching and Children's Art. Site represents the information about different activities of the Center for Practice and Research in Museum Pedagogy of the State Russian Museum. Center.smr.ru/win/org/raduga/index.htm, Exhibition Center Rajiga. Cha.ru, the Neutral House of Artist, Na. The Neutral House of Artist has no analogy neither in Russian nor in Europe. Computer-museum.ru, Virtual Computer Museum of Russia, contain information about computers' history in Russia. cpolicy.ru, Cultural Policy Institute. cult.gachina.ru/Priorat, Priorovsky Palace in Gachina. cultinfo.ru/Dionysi, Dionysi Fresco Museum. Dionysi Fresco Museum was established on basis of Ferapontov Monastery. Culture.pskov.ru, Culture of the Pskov land, CD Faberge Easter eggs. Many mysteries and legends are weaved round the masterpiece of the jeweller's art, the famous collection of Faberge Easter eggs. D137.ru, Gallery D137, the website the St. Petersburg Gallery D137, projects, information about artists, news. Darwin.museum.ru, State Darwin Museum. This very well-designed site gives virtual guided tours, video clips, and photographic displays, all based on the museum's general theme of evolution and diversity in the natural world, including the development of the study of biological sciences. Darwin.museum.ru/expos/Dino, Mesozoic, Dinosaurus period. Dobryansk.ru/Crystalem, Dyatkov cut glass plant, exhibits from a rare collection at the Dyatkov cut glass factory, which produced special services for the Kremlin, cups for championships, vases, and decorative glass. Doncossacks.ru, Museum of the History of the Don Cossacks. dvgu.ru/region/culture/fort/index.htm, Vladivostok Fortress. edu.nsu.ru/Museum, Museum of a History of Development of National Education of Novosibirsk Region. fmm.ru, Fersman Mineralogical Museum RAS. Freud.ru, Freud's Dream Museum. gallery-manege.ru, Gallery Manege. gallery.nsc.ru/index_r.htm, Art Gallery of Novosibirsk. gallery.rubtsovsk.ru, the Municipal Rubtsov Picture Gallery named V. Tikhanov. The Municipal Picture Gallery named V. Tikhanov in Rubtsovsk of Altai region exhibits in the halls painting and drawing, crafts and arts, works by native sculptures V. Kolik and G. Lukyanov. gallery.tversa.ru, Tver Regional Art Gallery. gallery.urc.ac.ru, Chelyabinsk Region Picture Gallery. Chelyabinsk Region Picture Gallery presents the art museum of the universal classical type in terms of its character and the content of its collection and activity. gbmt.ru, the Timir-Yazov State Museum of Biology, the site of the Timir-Yazov Biological Museum, Moscow, gives a short illustrated description of the museum's departments, exhibits, exhibitions, and activities. golubkina.nm.ru, Museum Masterful A.S. Golokinojes in Zaraysk and Moscow. Guelman.ru, M. Guelman Gallery. heritage-institute.ru/index.html, the Russian Research Institute of Cultural and Heritage Network. The Russian Research Institute of Cultural and Natural Heritage was established by the decision of the government of the Russian Federation in 1992. heritage.perm.ru/holovika/index.htm, Architectural and Ethnographical Museum Khoklovka. avia.russian.ee/air/monino/index.html, Air Force Museum at Monino. HermitageMuseum.org, the State Hermitage Museum, a beautifully designed website that has a brilliant virtual tour of the museum complete with panoramic film footage of the rooms, and virtual exhibitions that take exhibits from many different museums all over the world as well as the storage rooms of the Hermitage. hkm.ru, the N.I. Grotakov Khabarovsk Regional Lore Museum. The forming of the Khabarovsk Regional Lore Museum is connected with the name of the first head of the Pryamursky Department of the Imperial Russian Geographical Society, Pterg's Governor-General N. ikz.ru/culture/tmii/index.htm, Tyumen Regional Museum of Fine Arts. Tyumen Regional Museum of Fine Arts was founded in 1957. ikz.ru/culture/rgfp, Art Gallery of the State Regional Generation Fund. Art Gallery is one of the State Regional Generation Fund's programs. ikz.ru/culture/isctisk/index.html, Istinsky People Regional Studies Museum named after A.L. Meljanov. museum.ru/museum/aom/bog/main.htm, Bogachinsky Museum of Local Lore, the website of the Bogachinsky Museum of Local Lore. ikz.ru/culture/reshev-gallery, G. ikz.ru/culture/tiobeleske/index.htm, the State Tobolsk Museum Reserve. ikz.ru/culture/igozhev, the USSR People's Artist V. Igozhev House Museum, CD, the History of Russia. ikz.ru/culture/Yarkovo, Yarkovsky Museum of Local Lore. informatics.org/museum/index.html, k.tsiolkovsky State Museum of the History of Cosmonautics. isu.ru/insts/botsad/index.htm, Botanic Garden of Irkutsk State University. izo.polonity.ru, Kemerova Oblast Fine Arts Museum. kaluga.amr-museum.ru, the Kaluga Region Study Museum. Karelia.ru/kgkm, Karelian State Museum of Regional. kastarma.irnet.ru, Nizhnerodinsk Museum of Regional Studies. kcn.ru/tet_ru/history/sviyazhsk, Historical and Architectural Monuments of Svyazhska. kcn.ru/tet_ru/university t/archaeology, Archaeological Museum of the Kazan State University. The Archaeological Museum of the Kazan State University is one of the largest and oldest museums of such kind. kemzu.ru/org/SAPAR, Siberian Association of Prehistoric Art Researchers, SAPAR official page. kirov.ru/kpm, the Kotelnik Paleontological Museum. This museum became the first regional research center in Russia which investigates Permian terrestrial vertebrate faunas. kizhi.karelia.ru, State Historical Architectural and Ethnographical Museum Reserve. Kizi, the website represents the State Historical Architectural and Ethnographical Museum Reserve Kizi, which is a unique historical zone in the North European part of Russia. km.ru/Golden Ring, Golden Ring of Russia, the virtual guide around the Russian Golden Ring of 15 towns towards the west from Moscow. komi.com/nmrk, National Museum of Komi Republic. kreml.alexandrovi.ru, Alexandrovskaya Sloboda. kreml.ru, the State Historical Cultural Museum Preserve, Moscow. Kremlin, the official web ste of the Kremlin Museum, the oldest museum in Russia. ksu.ru/chmku, the Museum of Kazan School of Chemistry. ksu.ru/miku, the Museum of Kazan University History, the website of the Museum of History of Kazan University. kolpoeli.ru, the State Military Historical and Natural Museum Reserve, Kolakovo Poly. kunstkamera.ru, Peter the Great Museum of Anthropology and Ethnography. Kunstkamera RAS, the website of the eldest Russian State Museum. Kursk.amr-museum.ru, Kursk Museum Association. The museum net of the Kursk region includes more than 20 state museums and about 170 public ones. Kuskovio.ru, the State Museum of Ceramics and the 18th century Kuskovo estate. Elavra.spb.ru, the Holy Trinity Alexander Nevsky Lavra. The Holy Trinity Alexander Nevsky Lavra functions nowadays as an Orthodox monastery belonging to the St. Petersburg Eparchy, is one of the architectural and historic center of St. Library.sgu.ru/angles/main.htm, Angelsky Regional Studies Museum. Library.sgu.ru/Chern, the Stat Museum Estate of N.G. Chernyshevsky, the Museum of N.G. Chernyshevsky, 1828 to 1899, a prominent writer and public figure, has been existing in Saratov for 78 years already. Lomakovika.ru, Museum of Antique Automobiles and Motorcycles in Moscow, an essential site for anyone interested in automobile history. Lomonosov.pomersu.ru, Historical and Memorial Museum named M. Mama Evhill.volgodimin.ru, Mama Ejvhill. Mama Ejvhill is a place in Volgograd, which is closely connected with the events of the Second World War and with the Great Stalingrad Battle. It is the glorified Mamayev Hill with its memorial complex to the heroes of the Stalingrad Battle. Manege.spb.ru, Central Exhibition Hall Manege, S. Peterbug. Marfino.narod.ru, Marfino. mari-el.ru/kazm_museum, Kozhmodomyansky Museum. The website of Kozhmodomyansky Museum tells about the history of the museum, developments of its activity and collections. md.spb.ru, Fyodor Dostoevsky Literary and Memorial Museum. mda.org.uk/index.htm, Museum Documentations Association. mdf.ru, Moscow House of Photography. The official website of the Moscow House of Photography is colorful and various as well as photographic art. Memo.ru/museum, Museum Collection of International Society Memorial. Metro.ru, Museum of Moscow Subway, a purely virtual museum dedicated to the Moscow Metro, which aims to be an archive, illustrated album, information guide, and encyclopedia as well. Mira1.ru, the Krasnoyarsk Museum Center. moninoaviation.com/index.html, Air Force Museum, Monino, Russia, the website devoted to Air Force Museum in Monino, Russia, which is very famous in Russia as well as abroad. Morflot.tsi.ru, Museum of a Marine Sea Fleet of Russia. The Museum of a Marine Sea Fleet of Russia is created to tell to all people about a history and greatness of Fleet of Russia. MoscowCatMuseum.com, Moscow Cat Museum. MoscowKremlin.ru, Moscow Kremlin, a very interesting excursion to the one of the biggest museums in the world, Moscow Kremlin. MoscowZoo.ru, Moscow Zoo, Russia's oldest zoo, has an excellent website with detailed, well-presented, and interesting information. Murman.ru/culture/museum, the Murmansk Regional Museum of Local Lore. On the website of the Murmansk Regional Museum of Local Lore you will know about its various activity including the International Project Bear. Musaykino.ru, the Cinema Museum. The Musaykino, the Cinema Museum is one of Russia's newest museums, but its history dates back almost 100 years. Museum.azov.ru, Azovsky Museum of Local Lore, the first museum in Azov. Azovsky Museum of Local Lore, was built up in time of war, revolution, instability, and economic decline. Museum.istare.ru/index.html, Museum of History, Architecture and Fine Arts, New Jerusalem, the story about one of oldest state museums in Moscow region. Museum.lisai.ru, Computer Technique Museum. Computer Technique Museum devotes to the history of computers and demonstrates the rarities of the different computer periods. Museum.murom.ru, Murom Historical and Art Museum. The Murom Historical and Art Museum is often called a small hermitage in spite of the chamber character of its expositions. museum.murum.ru/www.muse/afisha/webgar.htm, Gardariki Club, the Youth Club of Historical Reconstruction and Experimental Archaeology Gardariki, project of the Murum Museum of Local Lore. museum.navy.ru/index.htm, the Central Naval Museum. This site has plenty of information about the Central Naval Museum, St. Petersburg. museum.nnov.ru/art, Nizhny Novgorod State Museum of Art, the official website of the Nizhny Novgorod State Museum of Art. museum.norilsk.ru, the State Museum of History of Exploration of the Norilsk region. museum.omskyelikom.ru, Omsk region, and Siberia museums. museum.omskyelikom.ru/agik, Omsk State Museum of History and Regional Studies. museum.ru/museum/orden/default.htm, exhibition of Soviet orders and medals. museum.ru/cosmonav, Memorial Museum of Cosmonautics, the site of the Cosmonaut Museum, where you can find the original spacesuit as worn by Yuri Gagarin, is brief but informative and well designed to reflect the museum's theme. museum.ru/museum/ships/default.htm, Museum of Sailing Ships. museum.ru/museum/railway, Central Museum of Railway Transport. museum.ru/museum/fine_ichthyology, visual ichthyology. museum.ru/tretyakov/hid/surar1.htm, the Tretjayakov Gallery. museum.ru/museum/lit_oriol, the State Literaturika Museum by Ivan S. museum.ru/museum/primitive, virtual museum of Russian primitive. museum.ru/outsider, the Outsider Art Museum, who can be called a real artist? These questions are raised while meeting the works of people whose right to be accepted is highly disputable, whose works were doomed to be ignored. museum.ru/museum/polit_hist, State Museum of the Political History of Russia, an interesting site, about an interesting museum that aims look analytically at the political history of Russia. museum.ru/museum/Rorden, virtual exhibition Russian Nomad Awards. museum.ru/museum/ASRSM, Altai State Regional Studies Museum. museum.ru/GME, the State Museum of Fine Arts named after A.S. Pushkin, a very detailed and informative site, that includes all necessary information for visitors as well as a history of the museum, a virtual tour around the museum, panoramas of the collections, and pictures of the famous exhibits, that range from ancient Egyptian decorative arts to paintings by Gauguin and Cezanne. museum.ru/museum/Tarkovsky/default.htm, A. Tarkovsky Museum, a small site, but the museum itself is new. museum.ru/museum/Ivanova, the Ivanova State Society of Historical and Local Lore Museums of D.G. Burilin. This site invites you in Ivanova, one of tourist centers of Russia, large industrial regional city. museum.ru/Moscow, Museum of History of Moscow, an interesting site giving details and photographs of the exhibits of one of the oldest museums in Moscow, which includes a branch called Chambers of the Old English Court, a collection dedicated to Anglo-Russian relations. museum.ru/museum/aom/ncy/ncy.htm, Ensiysk Regional Studies Museum. museum.ru/Majakovsky/default.htm, the State Museum of VV. museum.ru/museum/Polenovo, Polnovo Museum and Reserve. The State Memorial History, Art and Natural Museum Reserve is one of the biggest and most famous in Russia and abroad. museum.ru/mirror/vlmp/l_vlmp.asp, Russian. museum.ru/museum/Ostankino, Museum and Estate Ostankino. This website introduces you to a unique example of 18th century architecture, takes you on a tour of the palace and has information about its history and collections. museum.ru/Pushkin, the State Pushkin Memorial Museum, a splendid excursion around the State Pushkin Museum, the house in which he lived when in Moscow and which has been preserved to look exactly as it did then. This is an ideal opportunity to see the collection of exhibits connected to Pushkin himself, while at the same time soaking up the atmosphere of Moscow in the 1830s. museum.ru/museum/aom/gonsk/main.hdm, the Kansk Museum of Local Lore, the official website of the Kansk Museum of Local Lore. museum.ru/Muranovio, the Fifer Tyhuchev Museum Muranovo, the official website of the Fifer Tyhuchev Museum Muranovo. museum.ru/museum/bread, bread Museum of St. Petersburg. museum.ru/web/lect.asp, dinosaurs and non-dinosaurs. museum.ru/Glinka, Museum of Musical Culture. museum.ru/Ko-Lomen, the Museum Reserve Kolomenskoye. The website of the Museum Reserve Kolomenskoye help you to know a lot about this amazing summary residence of Russian Tsars. museum.sakh.com/Rus, Sakhalin Oblast Regional Studies Museum. museum.sbor.net, Sosnovoborsky Contemporary Art Museum. museum.tver.ru, Tver State Union Museum. museum.vladimir.ru, Vladimir Suzdal Museum and Reserve. The official website for the Vladimir Suzdal complex has a huge amount of information about the buildings, museums, exhibitions, and collections of this unique example of ancient architecture. museumgorky.ru, State Historical Reserve of the Lenin's Hill. museumpushkin.ru, the National Pushkin Museum. The National Pushkin Museum is one of the oldest literary museum in Russia. museums.karelia.ru, Museums of Karelia, CD Masterpieces of Architecture. This program displays 250 masterpieces of architecture, 1,200 illustrations accompanied with captivating stories about the history of world architecture, live video footage, 30 musical themes created especially for this disc, and interactive geographic maps with pictograms. museums.karelia.ru/agency, Republic of Karelia Museum Agency, CD Alexander I and Napoleon. The disc is devoted to the two emperors, Alexander I and Napoleon, and includes 88 sujets, 1,000 images, 200 articles, timeline, animations about 4 main battles, more than 3 hours of music and speech. musobl.devo.ru/sbmmain8.html, Sergiev Opozitsky State History Art Museum Preserve. The Sergei Pozid Museum/Monastery complex is comprised of more than 50 edifices, dating from 1340, and is one of Russia's most treasured artistic monuments. ncca.ru, the National Center for Contemporary Arts, NCCA, the official website of the National Center for Contemporary Arts, NCCA. newart.ru, Gallery of a Children's Figure Children in the Internet. The virtual gallery of a children's figure Children in the Internet will allow you to plunge into the magic world of children's creativity. nntu.sci-nov.ru/rus/kreml/kremlin.htm, Nizhny Novgorod Kremlin. nonmuseum.ru, the Museum of Nonconformist Art. nrsm.nsc.ru/ind_win.htm, Novosibirsk Regional Studies Museum. Information about historic, anthropologic, and cultural collections of Siberia. nsk.su/tilde/lavallel/rus, Leval Art Gallery, CD Nevsky Prospect. Nevsky Prospect, the main artery of St. Petersburg, is the symbol of Russian northern capital upon the Neva, the living incarnation of the history imprinted in painting and engravings, glorified in poems and prose. oldlatiga.spb.ru/rus, Staraya Latiga. oldradio.onago.ru/index_r.htm, Old Radio Gallery. omg2.ru/subdivisions/museum/home.html, History Museum of the State Omsk Technical University, the official website of the History Museum of the Omsk State Technical University. 1812panorama.ru, Panorama Borodino Battle by Franz Rubbo. Opera.r2.ru, Nikolai Andreevich Rimsky-Korsakov, the website devoted to great Russian composer Nikolai Andreevich Rimsky-Korsakov was created by his progeny. Orientalart.ru, the State Orient Museum. The State Orient Museum saves the unique art collection of Eastern countries. Ostermaniana.ru/house/house.html, Count Osterman House, Count Osterman House. oamuseum.odessa.ua/indexru.htm, Odessa Museum of Western and Eastern Art, electronic collection of exhibits. Palea.ru/museum, Paleontological museum named after U.A. Orlov of Russian Academy of Science. Pavlov.amr-museum.ru, the Memorial Museum Estate of Akademikani. Pavlov. Pavlovsky.org, the State Museum Preserve Pavlovsk, Pavlovsk, the former summer residence of Emperor Paul I, is one of Russia's most treasured museums. Peterhof.org/index1.htm, Peterhof, the world-famous palace, fountain, and park ensemble of Peterhof is an outstanding landmark of Russian artistic culture of the 18-19th centuries. Peterhof.ru, the State Museum and Preserve Peterhof, the famous Peterhof Palace has a site that perfectly reflects its elegant atmosphere. phillumini.onago.ru/index_r.htm, Virtual Matchbox Labels Museum, more than 1,000 matchbox labels from several countries. Planetarium.ru, Moscow Planetarium, the Moscow Planetarium is a center of natural sciences popularization. plmusee.narod.ru, Museum of Pilgrimage and Sacred Places. polarmuseum.sp.ru, Russian State Museum of Arctic and Antarctic. psn.ru/usadb, Pushchino Homestead, CD Christ the Savior Cathedral. This disc lets you to take a new look at the great monument of Russian architecture and Orthodox spirit. Pushkin.lnk.ru, the State Museum and Reserve Mikhailovskoye in Pushkinsky Gory. pushkinskaja-10.spb.ru, the Cultural Center Pushkinskaya 10. Rarities.da.ru, the Nizhny Tagil Museum Reserve of Mining and Metallurgy of the Middle Urals, Collections. Nizhny Tagil Museum Reserve of Mining and Metallurgy of the Middle Urals, which includes 11 acting muses in the city Nizhny Tagil and its vicinities and has site United Funds, which base was based in the medium 19, date of basis a museum 1840. relig-museum.ru, the State Museum of the History of Religion. RICU.ru, Russian Institute for Cultural Research. ROERICH-museum.ru, the International Center Museum named N.K. Rurik.org, Nicholas Rurik Museum. Rostmuseum.ru, the State Museum and Reserve Rostov Kremlin. The site of the Rostov Kremlin has a lot of textual information on the history, collection, and architecture of the museum but without a translation into English. ruskis.net, Virtual Museum of the Swaat Synthesizers. Rusmuseum.ru, State Russian Museum. The Russian Museum in St. Petersburg is the world's largest collection of Russian art. rustelecom-museum.ru, the A.S. Central Museum of Communication. saint-russia.narod.ru, St. Russia Museum. sakharov-center.ru, Museum and Society Center World, Progress and People's Rights named after Andrei Sakharov. saval.ru/museum/index1.shtml, Savalovsky Ancient Computer Museum, CD Generalissimo Suvorov. sgm.ru, Vernadska State Geological Museum, the site of the State Geological Museum, with in-depth information on the history, founding principles, and collection of the museum. Shamatovo.ru, State Historical Literary and Natural Museum of Reserve of Alexander Blok. shakchmatovo.amr-museum.ru, the State Historical Literary and Natural Museum Reserve by A. Blok. Shiphistory.navy.ru, the Ships of Russia, central site on a history of the Russian Navy. Shirak Museum.am, Shirak Regional Museum. shishkin-gallery.ru, Leonid Shishkin Gallery. This site is dedicated to the collection of Leonid Shishkin Gallery, which consists mostly of Russian paintings of 19th, 20th centuries and post-war Soviet paintings, 1950 to 80s. shm.ru, the State Historical Museum. The State Historical Museum and its filial departments, including the Lenin Museum and a number of convents in the Moscow area, have a huge collection of archaeological exhibits, manuscripts, costumes, ceramics, glassware, and weapons, to name but a few, and all the details are on this site, which is translated into English, French, and German. Sholokhov.by.ru, the Sholokhov State Museum, Reserve. Shukshin.museum.ru, State Historical and Memorial Museum Reserve v.m. Shukshin, a very interesting site that visits the museum and park in memory of Vasily Shukshin, the famous Russian writer, director, and actor. siblind.ru/firm/zoo, Novosibirsk Zoo. sidur.ru/sidur.html, Moscow State Vadim Sidur Museum. You will get acquainted to a history of creation of a museum, learn about life and creativity of this surprising and very talented artist and sculptor. siebiez-museum.narod.ru, Sebezhsky Museum of Local Lore. Sebezhsky Museum of Local Lore was founded in 1927 by enterprising group of teachers. Soilmuseum.narod.ru, Dakushev Central Soil Museum. soviet-awards.com, the Soviet Military Awards page. The purpose of this site is to educate and inform those interested in collecting Soviet military and labor awards issued between 1917 to 1991. sovr.ru, the State Museum of Contemporary Russian History. sbbkrepost.ru, the City Museum Foundation of St. Petersburg. sbbmuseum.ru, the State Museum for the History of St. Petersburg, the official website of the State Museum for the History of St. Petersburg, one of the most beautiful city of the world. sbbzoo.ru, Leningradsky Zoo, one of the oldest zoological gardens in Russia and one of the most northern in the world. Stavropol.museum.ru, the State Stavropol Museum of Local Lore named G. stv.ru/city/museum/skme, Stavropol Region Fine Arts Museum. The website tells about history of the Stavropol Region Fine Arts Museum, about its activity and collections, Russian and West European art, crafts, and arts. suvorovmuseum.spb.ru, Suvorov Memorial Museum. Alexander Suvorov is the great publicly esteemed Russian military leader. szmn.sbros.ru/russian.hdm, Siberian Zoological Museum. Timirski.newmail.ru, the State Nature Biosphere Reserve Timirski. tankmuseum.ru/index_r.html, Military Historical Museum of Armored Vehicles and Equipment. Tarhany.ru, State Lermontov Museum Preserve Tarhany. ties.it/escultura, Italian sculptures. Tretyakov.gallery.ru, the State Tretyakov Gallery. The official site of the State Tretyakov Gallery is well designed and has easily accessible information about the collection and exhibitions, including those in the other branches of the gallery, the modern collection at Krimsky Val, the on-site church, the house museums of Vasnetsov and Larionov/Gonkarava. tsaritsYno-museum.ru, Museum Reserved Tsaritsino. Turgenev.org.ru, Russian writer I.S. Turgenev. The site contains the biographic data on writer I.S. Turgenev, the information on his creativity. Tsar.ru, the State Museum Tsarskoye Selo. The Tsarskoye Selo is a brilliant monument of world architecture and park and garden artistry of the 18th to 20th centuries. Tsar.ru/amber, the Amber Room. This website will allow you to learn about the history, the present-day news concerning this famous masterpiece, and about the completion of its reconstruction by a team of craftsmen of the RLS, the Tsarskoye Selo Amber Workshop, with the financial support of the German private company Rurgas AG. uchcom.botic.ru/apocalypse/index.ru.html, Iconographic subjects guide the Apocalypse in the Trinity Cathedral in Pereslavl-Zaleski and Internet Network. The Apocalypse is one of the most mysterious and popular books in Christianity. ucmp.berkeley.edu/pin/pinentrance.html, Russian Paleontological Institute. This is a short unofficial site that takes visitors on an excursion around the Moscow Paleontological Museum, with pictures and descriptions of the exhibits. uic.ssu.samara.ru/tilde-changeal, International Children's Internet Gallery. un-museum.ru, the Museum of Peacekeeping Operations. The Museum of Peacekeeping Operations is unique one in Russia devoted to peacemaking activity of the world community. The idea to establish a museum on UN peacekeeping was born at the 1st Russian National Conference Peacekeeping Operations. university.tversa.ru/miscellaneous/archaeology, Tver University Archaeological Museum. usdu.ru/musei/musei.html, the History Museum of the State Ural Technical University, the website of the History Museum of the State Ural Technical University. virt.vrn.ru/zoo, Voronezh Zoological Garden, Voronezh Zoological Gardens. The former Exonarium was founded in summer 1995 in the Winter Gardens of Voronezh Aircraft Building Corporation. vic.spb.ru/rk/rus/narkar.htm, n.Rimsky-Korsakov, CD Artistic Encyclopedia of the Classical Foreign Art. Artistic Encyclopedia illustrates the history of the art and architecture for the period from the ancient civilizations to the end of the 19th century. Vysotsky.ru, the State Cultural Center and Museum by V.S. Vysotsky. Vshz.ru, Museum of World Ocean. vlad-fort.ru, Battle, Historical Fortificational Museum Vladivostok Fortress. The official website of the Museum Vladivostok Fortress acquaints with history of the Vladivostok Fortress and Museum. vm.chemzu.ru, the Prehistoric Art. The main peculiarity of the virtual museum is that exhibits actually kept in quite different museums, in different countries and even on different continents are gathered here as if in one museum. vodkamuseum.ru, Russian Vodka Museum. Vodka is a heady drink which is considered traditional on a par with matryoshka and bear living on the streets of Russian towns. vologda.ru/tilde-museum, Vologda State Historical and Architectural Museum Preserve. wax.ru, Museum of Wax Figures. The museum specializes in arranging traveling exhibitions. wco.ru/icons, Virtual Catalog of Icons. webantique.ru, the Russian Antique Online, the Virtual Information Almanac. The Russian Antique Online is a organ, which informated about the last events and new tendencies in the Russian antiques world. witcombe.sbc.edu/artlinks.html, art history, the website with large quantity of informational resources devoted to art history, prehistoric art, ancient Egypt and the Near East, ancient Greece and Rome, art of Middle Ages, Renaissance Sanchi, Baroque, right up to X-Exist century. xlegio.ru, xlegio. yarmp.yar.ru, Yaroslavl Museum, Preserve of History and Architecture. urikli.design.ru/alco, anti-alcohol poster gallery. zoo.kharkov.ua, Kharkov Zoo, the website of Kharkov Zoo tells you about its history. zoo.ru, zoo.